My name is Dustin Kelly, but everybody calls me DJ. I'm prior Army, serving as both a Ford observer and a military police officer. I spent the last 14 and a half years as a police officer and detective in a large metropolitan police department. Two things that I've learned throughout my career. One, everybody has a story to tell. And two, the best stories are true. This is the DTD Podcast. And we're live. Hey guys, welcome back into the studios. You know, this week we have a special guy. I've recorded with him before. We had a little bit of trouble. The file disappeared, all due to my fault. He was kind enough to come back on and talk to us. You know, he's been through a lot through his childhood. He has worked immensely hard in not only his career, but in his family life, being a father, being a husband, not to mention a decorated Navy SEAL. But he's come to this conclusion about how he's going to take his life in another direction, how he's going to teach other people to do it. So this week in the studio, Joseph Hahn, man, the bearded frogman. I'm so happy you're here. I'm so glad that you came back to talk to me. So let's get into it, man. Let's start. November 20th, 1982, the world meets you. Let's talk about it, childhood, and what kind of happened, because it's a crazy story from the very beginning.
Yeah, I remember it like it was 41 years ago. Born in the great state of Texas, in Odessa. Not too sure of how my mom and dad got there. My family kind of came through with a land rush back in the day. Most of them settled in Oklahoma, as far as lineage and Heritage 21 and those tracking systems and name stuff goes. Mom was from New Jersey, ended up in Texas. I'm assuming something to do with the oil stuff, because that's usually what most people end up in Odessa for. My brother and I were born there. Moved to Austin shortly after that because my little sister was born about 3 years after that. Bounced around Central Texas till my mom was diagnosed with cancer. When she passed away, the state of Texas deemed my father unfit to take care of us, and we entered the foster care system when I was about 5 years old.
So let's talk about that, because we really need to kind of drill down on that. The state decided your father wasn't fit to be your father. You lose your mom at 4 years old. And I think that kind of starts your trajectory, not necessarily toward your career, but definitely towards how you were a father, how you were a family man. So can we talk a little bit about that? I know there's probably not a lot of memories from being 4 or 5 around that kind of stuff, but there has to be ones as you get a little older. You were in over 50 foster homes, but it didn't deter you from anything. You still did good in school, all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about just the loss and then pretty much losing your entire family.
Yeah, I remember my mom being sick. I remember going to see her in the hospital. Just stuff like that definitely sticks with somebody no matter what the age is, I believe. I actually remember the day that she died. We were in Burnett, living close by the Burnett Dam. Remember hearing my father scream. We kind of got rushed out of the house. And a lady from the church, we stayed with her for a few weeks. Come to find out that my mom passed throughout the evening. And they went through the whole process. Was told that they didn't think we could handle the funeral, so they didn't really let us attend. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. We moved from the house into another smaller house in Burnett. And we assumed that she was still in the hospital because our dad really didn't open up and tell us about what happened. But I remember the night he did tell us that she was no longer coming home, eating some macaroni and cheese. My little sister didn't understand. She was about 2, 3 at the time. But yeah, no, it was rough. My dad didn't do too well after that. Definitely got super depressed, turned to alcohol. Now I'm pretty sure us showing up to school a few times without bathing, and because I was in pre-K kindergarten at the time, and my brother's in first grade. Probably got a decent amount of calls about, especially me and my brother running around town. The old adage, didn't come back till the lights to come on. We'd always just go hanging around, hanging about, riding bicycles, not really causing any troubles, but 2 little boys riding around without supervision definitely would, especially being a dad these days, would pique my interest. I'd start asking questions, especially if I consistently saw them day in and day out, unsupervised. I remember my dad they took my sister and my brother from school I was in kindergarten and we only did it till noon. So I came home early, got to the house, was by myself for a little bit. Dad came home kind of in a panic, loaded us up myself up in the station wagon, started headed towards Oklahoma to my aunt's house. I don't know how long he drove, but it seemed like a good ways, and he ended up turning back, and we went to the neighbor's house behind it. And then the next morning, CPS and the police officers were there at that house and picked me up and put me in my first foster home.
How was it growing up like that in foster homes, never really having a place to call home, never really having a family as you move through it until later on, of course?
It was at first, it was kind of surreal. Man, it just seemed so temporary constantly. Just that temporary. I believed that I'd be home soon. I'd be back with my dad. I thought, he would get his stuff together. So from I was about 5 till 7, 8, I believe, just bounced around to different foster homes because most of them were supposed to be temporary. None of them were really a permanent stay until I got to one that was in Waco. And that's when the state of Texas kind of brought up taking my father's rights away. He never showed up to court. And the state of Texas removed his rights as a parent and put us up for adoption pretty much shortly after that. But yeah, like the first semi-permanent foster home that I was actually with my brother and my sister with was in the second grade. Because I remember that starting the second grade with them. But before that, it was, I don't know, it was a decent amount of little homes bouncing around from month to month. It seemed like, I was about 9, 10 years old when they removed his rights and was put up for adoption.
Pretty hard to adopt 9, 10-year-old just because of the age that they're at. You had trouble with going around to all the houses and things like that, but you never really got in that much trouble overall. You still did really good in school. What do you think that was all about? Because a lot of people tend to stray off the road.
I got, I guess, as much trouble as any little boy would.
Of course.
Definitely not in legal trouble. No, I enjoyed school. School was something that was a constant for me. Realized that no matter what home I was going at, there was always going to be a school day. There was going to be a teacher. That setting was pretty much the constant and the grounding point when I was growing up. So no, I embraced school. It was just kind of easy for me all around. Things just made sense as far as academics wise.
As you go through, let's talk about when you finally kind of get to a place where you are steadfast, where you have kind of that family. Let's talk about that and the feelings that gave you when you first kind of get there and then as you move through it.
It was at that home in Waco. My brother, sister, and I is our first actual home together since we were taken from our father. There's a good family, the Mosleys. I got there, started the second grade year. I remember pulling up to the school. They pulled up and showed us the school right before it started, and that was pretty cool. They reassured us, was like, "Hey, we're going to be your home for the time being," because at the time when we first arrived there, our dad was, state of Texas still kind of dealing with the parental rights and whatnot, and kind of how to move forward with our case. From like the second grade to the fifth grade. So that was one of the longer homes that I stayed in because I was about 3 years pretty much. It was tough because when we got there, they knew it'd only be temporary, even though they wanted to adopt us when we first came up for adoption. But the process and how the state of Texas did it, I'm not sure the details on why we didn't get adopted by that foster home because they were interested. The foster mom and dad, unfortunately, has already passed. They were an older couple at the time, but their biological children still keep in contact with us.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. But no, we went up when our dad lost his rights. They have a thing called Wednesday's Child here in the state of Texas, and that's usually the adoption thing. So we got my brother, sister, and I had our own little segment in the Waco newspaper where it's Wednesday's Child, and a family wanted to adopt us when I was in fifth grade. And yeah, we left that home, which was was like the biggest ground base at the time with all the moves we had previous before that, because my brother and sister, the same thing. They bounced around from different homes. Yeah. And we went to try out our first adoption.
So how long, or I guess I should say, how many houses is this before you get to that first adoption? How many homes have you been in?
I want to say a good 8 to 10. I remember going from different emergency shelters to foster homes because usually when they place somebody, especially initially, it's some type of emergency shelter or temporary home, and it's short term to you know assess the situation at the children's house, and kind of determine what the do is there. So there's not really a set date usually. And some of these homes being short term, kids cycle through there pretty frequently because the goal is obviously to get the kid back to either a permanent residence or back to their house. So yeah, I mean, I actually was able to get all the paperwork from the state of Texas a couple of years ago, and I'm still kind of sifting through it because it was 15 years worth of stuff. So I'd say about 10 to that point.
Yeah, we talked about it being 50 total. So we still have 40 more homes to go through. We don't necessarily need to talk about every single home, but what was it that kept that movement going? Because 50 is a lot. Because even starting at 8, you're talking about, 5, you're talking about maybe 13 years total in the foster system before you hit 18. Yeah. That's a lot of houses. I mean, you're talking, that's like 3, almost 4 a year.
Yeah. It was like that. Man, I kind of got bitter after the first failed adoption. So that first adoption home didn't work out. And I was kind of getting to an age where I didn't feel like anybody really cared about me. So I was defiant. I definitely was a problem child, not in a legal sense, but you couldn't really tell me what to do. And also being as smart as I was, I definitely caused even twice as much trouble as I should have. But yeah, after that first failed adoption, they split us up again because I was the first one to leave the first adoption home. We went through, just bounced around from shelters to temporary homes to it was kind of like a boys ranch, but they had boys and girls. There was a kids ranch, place called the Hill Country Youth Ranch, which is a great place. Ended up getting there my 6th, 7th grade year in school. Got in some trouble there. Kind of got suspended or expelled from school at the end of my 6th grade year, and then was up for my second adoption at about that time. I'm at the 7th grade year.
When you're going through all this and you're going to all these different homes, you had talked about that you got a little bitter after that. And it almost seems to me like it puts you in kind of a circle, the chicken before the egg or the egg before the chicken, because you're angry and you feel like no one cares about you. But then you go into a home, they have trouble. So there's no real end to it. I'm almost wondering, though, when you go to all these, if it's turning you kind of into the person you are, the quiet, reserved, all that kind of stuff, or if it's turning kind of that warrior spirit into you that you had throughout your military career and stuff.
Not yet. Not at that point in time. Most of it was kind of waiting for the perfect home. So if I got to especially between that first and second adoption home and after that one, about the 8th grade, when I get to a home and something I didn't like or something that they did that didn't sit well with me, it could be small and petty. I definitely had some homes that I may have sabotaged intentionally with my behavior or my attitude, my defiance. And so, I mean, they would just constantly like, hey, we can't handle this kid. Some wasn't my fault. Some was definitely. But that whole rotation of different foster homes just became kind of the normal for me, the nomadic type lifestyle, which was a crappy thing to be as a kid. I remember being able to fit all my belongings in a Dole banana box. Had that thing through probably 6 to 8 homes that I could fit everything I owned, including the stuffed animal that I carried with me everywhere in the banana box.
I think you and I have talked about that banana box before.
Yeah. I think it held up pretty good just because it was made of, they whack, they usually they keep the bananas from deal, but it lasted me a good amount of time until somebody finally said, hey, you're getting a piece of luggage.
Yeah, I think that was probably a good idea. But, knowing you, I can see you traveling now with a banana box, just putting your stuff in it and loading it on the plane, telling them, just put it on the plane, huh? I'll pick it up on the backside of it.
It's definitely helped me travel light.
Right.
I can fit 3 to 5 days worth of clothing and hygiene material in a backpack for sure. I'm definitely helped me in my military career to pack light and pack quickly. So had a lot of practice with that beforehand.
Let's talk about when you get to the home that is kind of your final home, the one where you start turning into who you are, and the kind of influence that that foster dad and mom had on you.
So I remember it was freshman summer, it was my sophomore year. I got placed in a home in Lomita, and that's when kind of I started. I don't know what the shift was exactly, but I started being real concerned about what I would do when I got out of foster care, like that loom of being out on my own. Because beforehand, no matter what I would do, I know that hey, I'm only going to meal from somewhere. I'm always going to have a bed. I don't have to do anything. Literally, I can be as bad as I want because I'd been through all these foster homes, even up to like hospitals and stuff where they were trying to evaluate me for mental instability, and just realized I was just being, intelligent and being a turd pretty much. Yeah, no, it was 10th grade. It was with a foster home. One of the boys had in that home had turned 18, graduated out. There was a disagreement between the foster parents and that kid, and when he turned 18, they put all his stuff on the front porch and pretty much told him that he was free to go, and that was it. This dude, I felt sorry for him because he really didn't have any plans. Just went to school and kind of was doing what most of the things that I used to do, which is just like day to day. Hey, no matter what, I'm always going to have a place to stay. But when you turn 18, the state stops paying the foster home for you, and the foster home's no longer legally reliable or responsible for you. So no, he found his way to a bus station and ended up luckily being having some family back where he was from. Got on a bus and left, and that was a more like a shock of reality for me. Like, man, when I turn 18, I'm not gonna have a place to go because I didn't have really a hometown by that point. I'd bounced around to me foster homes and kind of lost anything that was who I was as a child before foster care. Like being a foster kid was my identity, was my life. I was like, man, I got to have a plan. So I started pressing the foster home for like trying to get a job, get a driver's license, applying for colleges, because miraculously somehow my school was never affected by my antics or behavior or moving from school to school or from home to home. Because even moving from school district to school district, everybody has a different way they teach, different curriculums, different flow. Most of the kids that I was with, they didn't care about school because A, it was too hard, and B, is tough to track as much as some of the kids would move around. I mean, I wasn't an anomaly by any means, but no, that kind of shocked me into reality. Started pressing that foster home a little bit. They kind of pressed back a little bit with telling me that I'd have my time when I turned 18, and kind of a little impatient with that. Started being a little more defiant with them, kind of the old Joe, but with good intentions. Because I need to go to either a group home, a transition home, because I have those for 16, 17-year-old kids about to graduate out the system. But it almost turned out bad for me. They almost admitted me into a hospital again because they were writing some stuff that was kind of above and beyond the truth. And my caseworker showed up and says, "Hey, your level of care." So foster kids have a level of care depending on how much you get paid for them. The more difficult the kid is, the more you get paid for them. So if they have special needs or special disabilities, they have a higher classification because you get paid more pretty much for them. And I was at a level 5 at the time, and they bumped me up to a 6, which is if you're at level 6, you need like institutionalized type care. And the foster home didn't mean to do that. I don't think they did. Reading some of the writings, because you have like daily write-ups you had to submit, but they exaggerate a little too much with a few kids, not just myself. But then my caseworker showed up and was like, "Hey, we got to take you. You're going to a state institution." But one of the other foster parents in the town kind of heard about this, and they reached out to him and was like, "Hey, we really don't want to stick this kid in an institute. He's going to lose a lot of what he has already built up as far as high school credits, ability to go to college, because I'd go to school and I basically was applying for colleges, and I was going to basically miss out. Like, you can't go to college coming out of a mental institution or any type of stuff like that. It's kind of frowned upon in an essay. But no, that my last foster homes, Wayne and Kathy Blue, they said, no, we know Joey. He was the coach of the baseball team, and just being foster parents in a small town that I was in, everybody knew everybody, especially the foster kids. They're like, yeah, we'll take them. But some of the stuff were saying that I was like suicidal and I was threatening to hurt animals and hurt other people. I never did anything like that. I never wanted to end my own life or hurt anybody like that. I may have been kind of a difficult child and defiant and couldn't really control or tell me what to do, but I never was extreme enough to do any of that stuff. But Wayne and Kathy knew that. They knew me personally. I always would talk to him. I definitely was excited and pretty happy that they decided to say, hey, we'll take him. We'll take that chance because we don't want this kid to fail because he's got too much of a bright future ahead of him. Definitely saved my life for sure. Changed the trajectory of where I ended up today.
Well, let's talk about them, what they kind of did, and because I think it lends into after you graduate from high school.
Yeah, they took me in. They already had 5 other boys in the home, all about from middle school to high school boys. So her groceries bill was excessive. Good thing we lived on a ranch. They had their own chickens and cows and stuff. But man, when we played football, especially two-a-days, the only thing she could feed us in was in pots, like those big industrial-sized kitchen pots. It reminded me of it prepped me for the military for sure. He was a command sergeant major in the Army for our artillery unit. He served in the 80s and 90s. He almost got recalled for Desert Storm. He had his whole thing on standby. Obviously, Desert Shield, Desert Storm. That was a shorter than expected conflict, but he was all rigged up and ready to go for that. So he was very regimented, not super hard on me. He had his boundaries and established his rules pretty clear first off. Man, I don't think I really got in trouble, if at all, at their house. I was in definitely a different mindset at that point. I was super grateful and nervous that I didn't want to mess this last home up because these folks were like, hey, we'll take care of him and make sure he gets set up. And immediately when I got there, they worked on helped me get a job. Like I ended up building fences and working for $5 an hour for a gentleman that was part of the church group that we all went to right down the road. And man, I never worked harder in my life. I did haul hay and stuff, growing up a little bit, different foster homes, because that was just nature of the beast when you bounce around Texas. But Mr. Walter Rosica was his name. He taught some good lessons just about caring for your stuff and being a good ranch hand. And man, I never worked harder in my life for $5 an hour than I did with that guy. No, it was good. That they helped me between my senior year summer. They helped me get my driver's license. They drove me to take all the state tests, the ACT, SATs, the national test. They helped me apply for all the colleges that I could ever dream of. Every one I applied to, I got in. So I was totally stoked by that, and drove me to all the academic banquets and awards and all kinds of stuff. Because when I got with them, I started becoming more involved in more of the extracurricular activities than I used to. It used to be school and home, pretty much with the other homes. Sometimes there were sports involved just because it was being in Texas. You can't not play football. But they really encouraged me and let me be the smart little dude that I was at the time. And yeah, definitely, if it wasn't for them, I would have ended up somewhere completely different.
Well, there's a couple questions that come to mind from that. When you said that you moved through these houses, and even if it was a small thing, if you didn't like it, you set up to get away from that house. I understand that you said you were scared. So do you think you didn't find anything wrong with this house because you were so scared, you were so close to that end where you're moving out? Or do you think that it was like kind of the first time you felt love, the first time you felt part of a family, or maybe a mixture of both of them?
Probably a mixture of both. So when I first got to Wayne and Kathy's house, I was greeted with big hugs. They knew exactly who I was. They told me the interaction they had with CPS in the state of Texas and my caseworker. And they explained how my case was presented, kind of the notes and write-ups that was given to me and their reaction. They were very immediately, they didn't know me from too much any other kid at the school in any type of intimate details or whatnot besides, it's just Joey who plays, baseball and football. But after hearing what the caseworker said, and I don't know, just the fact that they would immediately defend, my character before actually being a part of their family said a lot to me. And it did feel like home. Like it was weird. It's like the first time in a long time that immediately I felt like no matter what, even if I was the worst kid in the world, they would have never got rid of me if I was little. So I didn't feel like I needed to move anymore. I guess was the biggest thing. It's like that was my home base, and that was a pretty instant little feeling when I walked through those doors and they hugged me for the first time.
Well, and when you're thinking about even older, because you were talking about, moving into a group home or whatever to get ready to kind of transition to the outside world, were you of the thought, like, even after you're done, even after you're 18, you go to school or you go do whatever you're going to do, this is still going to be home that you can come back to?
Yeah, that was what kind of it. I don't know. It seemed like that happened pretty much overnight with them. Because my goal originally before getting to that home was getting that group home or getting that transition home and just leaving my childhood, my past behind me. Didn't really have a connection. My brother was about to graduate. My sister had been adopted by the second adoption home because they wanted to adopt a little girl. They didn't want my brother and I. So we got shifted back into foster care after that. And that's kind of what shifted my attitude to a really defined, I don't care where I'm at. If I don't like it, I'm going to leave immediately kind of personality and attitude. Was that second adoption home that pretty much gave up on us. And it just felt like, me against the world kind of deal. But with Wayne and Kathy, it was immediate switch the other way. Like I wasn't alone in this battle for life in general and success and trying to reach and obtain my goals. I actually felt like I could, everything your parents tell you as a kid, like you can do anything you want. You just got to put your mind to it. Like that was the first time I actually felt like I could.
With him being in the military, with him being a command sergeant major, was that kind of the first time that you looked at the military, you saw what kind of man it kind of molded and things like that? Or had you thought about the military before that? Because I know you were already thinking after graduation.
Military never crossed my mind in high school or in college. The only deal was I knew that military was always an option, just in general. But I knew transitioning out of foster care onto my own, that if things would get bad financially, I knew that was always an option, but it was never part of the plan. I was going to be a doctor, a pediatrician. I always got along well with, the younger kids in my school. And I enjoyed like helping people and kind of seeing people sick and watching my mom get sick. I wanted to kind of be that help for other people so they wouldn't get sick. As a kid earlier on after she died, and I was in my first couple homes, my thought was, hey, I'm going to cure cancer. And that was my thought and goal in my head from, about 6, 7 till I was about 12, 13. Then it just shifted to, being general doctor and whatnot. And because everybody that I knew that had parents that were doctors were considered successful. So the big thing was I wanted to be successful no matter what. But another thing, I wanted to help people. But the older I got, the more I just wanted to be, I want to help kids, especially those that don't feel like they have anywhere to turn to. Yeah, now it's hard for especially kids to sometimes talk to their parents about stuff that's really bothering them, and they show up as ailments. They may be feeling sick, but there may be a different issue besides just being sick. And so, having the background that I did, kind of wanting to do the pediatrics route, I figured I can kind of help kids all around in many different aspects. So that was the main goal when I was initially applying for colleges and wanting to go to college, was the pre-med route.
Well, you graduated third in your class, scholarships, you go to Texas A&M. Now, you said you didn't think about the military, but you did join the Corps cadets, correct?
So a buddy of mine I went to high school with was in the Corps, and then our number 2 in my class also joined the Corps. So when I went out to A&M, I started off as a normal college kid. And when I got there, I definitely was feeling kind of lonely and out of place. And so I wanted to have some type of structure and basically just structure. So I talked to the guys I went to high school with, and I was like, hey, I want to join the Corps. I want to join your guys' unit. That way I'm with some people I know, and I'm not, by myself, and I have some structure. It was one of the good things that, Wayne did was, Wayne and Kathy always had a good structured home. It wasn't, it may have been semi-chaos with a bunch of boys, but I always knew that when breakfast, lunch, and dinner was, I knew my roles and responsibilities. So going to college, obviously, just like any other kid that turns 18, you're like, crap, I got to set all that stuff up by myself. And so, I joined the Corps Cadets. I had no intentions of actually joining the military after that route. I definitely just wanted to get the experience, kind of go through that process, because the ROTC program at Texas A&M is huge. Like it's a big achievement in itself. Like, hey, I was at the Corps Cadets at Texas A&M, because that's a 4-year process. The way they were respected on campus was something that I admired, and I was like, man, I'd like to be one of those guys. So that was the initial goal when I joined the Corps Cadets. Yeah, and got there school in August, and I probably spent 2 weeks in a regular dorm and really transitioned to the Corps Cadets.
Well, it's interesting when you say that you got there and you felt lonely, you didn't have structure and stuff. And I think it's a cool part of your story when I look at it. And you went through so many homes. You were alone so much. You would think that you would get good at being alone. You know what I mean? Like just kind of figuring it out, moving along, because that's what you did for so many years. But when you get there, you decide you want to have that structure. Why do you think that followed you? Being as good at being alone, moving around, nomadic lifestyle, why it bothered you when you got there?
Man, I don't know. Like I do remember, I remember sitting in my dorm room, kind of studying and just studying, going to classes. And after that, I was like, man, I didn't really connect with anybody through the the NDOC portion of college. They called it fish camp there at Texas A&M. It was kind of cool, but it just, I don't know. It's felt like one of the few times that I actually felt super alone and like by myself. Even though bouncing from home to home, I always knew like, hey, no matter what happens here, there's always going to be another foster home. I'm always going to have a way out kind of deal. But with college and the real world, that's not an option. Like your way out there's no real way out. You got to figure that out. It's not decided for you. It's not like I can call up my caseworker or my foster parent and be like, hey, I don't like this. Let's go somewhere else. That was weird. But I felt like, especially being close, because I got decently close with some guys from the high school. It's a small school that I went to. So kind of helped me give me something to do in my free time, because I guess I didn't handle free time very well and didn't know what else to do. So go to school, study, and learn some basic discipline and some ROTC stuff.
Well, do you think that you felt different? Like when you looked at it and you see all these kids that you're going to school with the NDOC and stuff, when they move in, it's a big family experience. A lot of the moms and dads come down. They come down for mom and dad weekend. Did you ever feel different by being, even though you had that love at the very end, you had those guys to kind of sculpt your future? Do you think you maybe felt different than everyone else there?
Oh, 100%. Definitely didn't feel, yeah, it was completely different knowing that like I know I could always went back when Kathy for like the holidays and whatnot, but it was different seeing those guys with actual families and stuff, interacting with them, legacy stuff, or parents showing up with gifts and stuff for their dorm rooms, or just sending them letters. It was always different, and I definitely felt lonely.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And when you talk about it, that's the only thing I can think is that you felt almost like alien to that world, because there was so much, you had a lot to give. You were smart. You did biomedical research. You had kind of your goals in front of you, but I feel like there was always kind of a piece of you missing that you were trying to figure out what was needed.
I guess most people, especially when they get out of high school and they kind of go to college, they kind of find their crowd, like-minded individuals. My niece, same thing. She just graduated high school and she's just coming into her own person, because she actually finds those like-minded people that kind of relate to her and you can kind of connect with. I didn't really find that too much in college. Joined the ROTC program, did that for a little bit, and then I only did that for probably 6 weeks maybe. and I immediately got out just due to some basic finance issues. Most kids, especially in the ROTC program, not only on scholarships, but have other stuff paid for. Parents to help them out with truck payments and whatnot. Wayne and Kathy, even though they're great folks and great family, they weren't well off by any means, and I definitely wasn't going to want to lean on them to support me in any way financially when I could work. So that was the main issue with the Corps cadets, and short-lived there was like, is there any way I can do something for work? Because if I don't, I'm gonna lose my truck. And at the time, that's the only real possession I had that I had a responsibility for. But the Corps Cadets is very regimented, so nothing against them. It just doesn't accommodate somebody that has to work and go to school. So I quit the Corps, unfortunately, and joined the regular kids of campus, and actually ended up moving up back to the regular dorms with this other guy that dropped out of the Corps as well. Ended up becoming real best friends with him. He actually was kind of my people on the opposite end of the spectrum kind of guy. A guy named Jason Rochester. Still talk to him to this day, but him and I, we clicked immediately, and it was good stuff.
Well, and I was just about to ask that. You kind of answered it. When you leave the Corps and you go back to the regular, does that make you feel even further away? Because now you've tried to go to the Corps, you've tried to get that camaraderie. Now you leave there because you have to take care of the individual again. Does that just drive that point home even more that we talked about?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I was like, hey, I tried the whole trying to fit in with a crowd that I thought would be good, the structure and whatnot. But, at the end of the day, there's the heavy realism that, things cost money. And even though I was on got some scholarships and, tuition and stuff like that was paid for, the basic things like the essentials like food and the only possession I had at the time was a pickup truck. It's like, I got to pay for that stuff. I can't lose it because that's my lifeline to and from home on the weekends and the holidays and whatnot. But no, I was same thing. Used to transition quickly like that. So it was not something that I was kind of nervous about. I was like, all right, here I go back into another place, meet another person, live in another spot. But I got lucky when I moved out there because the guy that, like I said, Jason, that I moved in with, he too recently had just dropped out of the Corps. And so we connected immediately just with that small piece, and became best friends after that.
So you remember 9/11, you're in college when it happens. You had no aspirations to be in the military. What happened? First of all, do you remember 9/11? And then number two, how did it change that trajectory?
So, yep, I remember 9/11. I was actually still in the Corps. I had just told the upperclassmen that I was going to leave the Corps cadets. It was that day or the day before. It was one of those things where they weren't really yelling at me anymore and making me do all the freshman things. I was kind of in my room. I don't remember if I was packing up or about to pack up or kind of had that conversation, but we went across the hall to one of the upperclassmen's room, me and my buddy Seth, and we saw the towers fall right there on the television set that he had in his room. I remember being kind of scared and kind of angry at the time. It wasn't an immediate thing. I didn't think that day or the next day that I was like, man, I'm going to join the military. It was definitely something that kind of weighed at me a little bit and, made me scared. But I think after seeing the aftermath of that, seeing how the country had started rallying together and coming together as a whole, it's the first time that the country has never been divided about anything, absolutely nothing. And I want to say it was probably a couple months later, kind of seeing how everything was unfolding, the initial invasions and whatnot. And back in September 2002, I was like, you know what, I think I want to join the military and fight for my country. I remember the discussions I kind of had with myself were, I'm still young. I can always, finish school later, but I'm not going to be as young and healthy as I am now physically, even though I was nowhere close to being in any type of physical shape. I was skinny as a beanpole and wasn't working out at all. But, in my mind, being 19 years old, I thought I was strongest that the strong thing the military needed, and started doing research and looking up different avenues and paths in the military. but the initial goal was to be in some type of the medical field. I wanted to continue that process, but I also wanted to do something, in combat related. So, of course, my first look was the Marines, because I had that sweet commercial with that dude slaying the dragon. And I don't know how many guys that commercial got, but it almost got me. I was like, man, I'm doing this. I want to slay some dragons. And their uniform just looks sharp. It's like everybody else's look goofy. So I was looking in the Marines, did some research the old-fashioned way, because that was back before Google and the internet kind of kicked off. So it was all books and newspapers and just, you go to the military nonfiction section of the library and you start picking up different branches and checking them out. And then I started, I think the first like special operations, special forces kind of deal I came across with was Army Rangers. And I was like, oh, whoa, wait a second. So the whole special operations world kind of opened up with some books and, looking through that. And I looked, because at the time there was either the Army Rangers or the Navy SEALs, were the two ones like that were talked about a whole lot in like all the Vietnam books and stuff. I know there was other, the Air Force had their special operations branch. I didn't even look into the Marine ones. I didn't know they had one until I actually started my pipeline, and it was actually in the Navy. But what stood out to me on the Navy SEAL side of the house was the diving. I always loved the water, was super interested in learning, but being a broke college kid that had to work all the time, there's no way I was going to afford scuba lessons, and was nowhere close to any water per se. So I was like, you know what, they'll pay me to and teach me how to be a scuba diver. That sounds like a pretty cool job. And then every book that I kept picking up, especially from the Vietnam era, those guys were just so revered and had scared the enemy more than any other unit during that conflict. So I was like, man, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna be a SEAL. So I started collecting all the information I could, all the books and readabouts, pamphlets, to include video games. The U.S. SOCOM Navy SEALs on PlayStation 2. Playing that, imagining how cool I'd be one day. Yeah, and that's when I went and talked to a recruiter, because I wanted to make sure when I talked to a recruiter, I had what I wanted to tell them. I didn't want to go in there and be like guesswork, because everybody that I've earlier experiences in high school, talking to recruiters, because they were always buzzing around before you graduate. Those guys will they're huge salesmen, so they'll tell you what they think you need to do to meet whatever quota they need. And so I wanted to go, and I was like, I want to have a plan. I want to have what I want to do, and I want to make sure when I talk to the guy, this is what I want to do. And so that's what I did. Went talked to a Navy recruiter, told him, I want to be a Navy SEAL. He kind of looked at me and was like, I don't know, the attrition. He explained the attrition rate and looked at me and says, man, are close to being what you need to be to go through BUDS. And I was like, all right, well, I'm already started to train. So you let me know what I need to do. I want to sign some paperwork and at least give the old college try. So that's what I did. Signed some papers. Unfortunately, the medical route was, he told me there was a 2 to 3 year wait. And I was like, I don't want to wait 2 to 3 years. What's the quickest and shortest school you got so I can go to BUDS? And he was, well, Master at Arms is 6 weeks. It's here in San Antonio, so it's not too far away here in Texas. And you get a little bit of firearms training. And so I was like, I'm in with that. Growing up in foster care, we weren't allowed to mess with firearms. So my experience was very, very little with that, minus some, messing around with some BB guns and whatnot. So I signed up to be a Master at Arms, do that 6-week school, and go straight to BUDS. So I signed the paperwork. It's like 2002 sometime, middle to end of 2002. And I got put on the delayed entry program, because at that time they're having a decent influx of people signing up and joining the military in general. And then my ship-off date was October 2003.
Did Wayne take part in that at all? I mean, did he go and help you talk to the recruiter? Did he kind of give you any advice on anything like that? Or did he kind of stand back and let you handle it?
He didn't know about it. I did it all on my own. And I told him, and the grin on his face was pretty awesome. Like, he wasn't disappointed in me. He wasn't surprised. He was just as excited that I was going to join the military and decide to do that I was when I got accepted to Texas A&M and all the other schools. man, Wayne and Kathy just always been 110% supportive, especially if it made sense. And, I came to them and I was like, hey, this is what I did and this is why I did it. And they're like, that makes sense to me. This is great. You tell us what you need and we got you 100%, 110%. So immediately she heard my foster mom, or, Kathy, she immediately knew what to do, got me a calling card so I can be able to call home, got all me squared, like got me mentally prepped with whatever I needed for boot camp as far as the before stuff, because she knew the process, being a military spouse herself. And they were all aboard about it, and they were super stoked about it, and definitely very excited.
So when you go to boot camp, is it everything that you thought it was going to be? I mean, like when you get there, you're like, oh yeah, this is a great idea.
It was. So when I decided to do the Navy SEAL route, I bought every fitness book that I could find that had something to do with Navy SEALs. And I started doing whatever program was in those books and just started working out a lot of body weight stuff. And it was tough because I remember the first time I was like, I have to go run a mile and a half. I probably made it less than 5 minutes down the road. Lungs are screaming at me, the shins are screaming at me, and I'm walking going, oh, I don't know what the heck I signed myself up for. Finally make it to, there was a little park next to the Corps Cadets quad there that had like pull-up bars and stuff. And I jumped on that bar and I probably didn't hang no longer in like 5 seconds. I couldn't even do one pull-up. And I was like, man, it's going to be a long road. But I stuck with it. Like I got one of those weird, call on the phone, get the pull-up bar in your doorway type deals. And so every time I'd walk underneath that, at this time I'd moved into an apartment off campus. But I was doing pull-ups every time I went underneath that pull-up bar, trying to do stuff. Every time I'd wake up in the morning, that scene from Batman, I'd just kind of roll out of bed and try to do as many push-ups as possible, and sit-ups. And that was like my main focus once I signed those papers, was preparing for buds. I didn't want it to be a physical deterrent, like something that I couldn't do as far as the screener. Because that was always the thing. It's like guys would go there and the first thing, a lot of guys would fail with the screener. And I was like, well, I don't want to get stuck at, day one and not be able to do the push-ups and sit-ups. So no, I got to boot camp. I blew the Navy PT out of the water. It was a different shock. I overly prepared for the military as far as mentally and physically. A lot of people show up to the military either completely unprepared or they're forced to be there because if they don't, they're going to jail or something like that. So I had a whole different slew of people in my my boot camp class. I actually ended up getting out of shape during boot camp because we were in an integrated division and they had strict rules about how many push-ups they could do at one time. But there was like 3 or 4 of us that were going to buds, and we would pipe up every now and then during some of our little PT sessions to get extra. And then I think our chief at the time, his name was Chief Petty, actually pulled us aside and was like, hey, you guys need to keep it down a little bit. And we understand you guys are going to buds and you guys are ready for it. But some of these kids are nowhere close to the shape that you guys are in. And it's just kind of deterring the whole process for them. So you kind of like a man-to-man talk to the 3 of us that were going to buds. And we're like, all right, we'll keep it down a little bit. Cause we would say, is that it? Or, just small boot camp stuff. And just to get underneath the recruiters, the drill, what I call it, RDCs, they called them, get underneath their skin. Of course, they'd want to hammer you more, but they only can do so much as a class because they wanted everybody suffers together, kind of getting that team mentality built up. But no, boot camp was a good experience. I enjoyed it. Met a lot of good people. It definitely wasn't super tough. I knew that going in because of what I had ahead. I did enough reading on and stuff like that. Like I know what boot camp was entailed, and I know what Hell Week and buds, at least the first couple portions, was entailed. Before that, they didn't really have a whole lot as far as the whole pipeline for buds. Yeah, boot camp was a good experience. I couldn't complain. It definitely wasn't something that changed my life, but it definitely got me prepared as far as the Navy community that I would be joining. So I enjoyed it.
I want to ask you about sympathy. And do you think that with the life that you had leading all the way up to that, with leaving college to join the military, your whole childhood, do you think you had any sympathy for anyone that was kind of sandbagging or wasn't sure what they were going to do or wasn't sure of their decisions when they came in? Do you think you had that?
No. I remember talking to a whole lot of folks that would, because I had Wayne and Kathy and I had home, but I'd never missed home. Like that was the first time I actually saw people. I saw kids miss home, but like adults, I guess, like grown up adults missing home, and it was different. Like I didn't grasp that concept of missing home. Like we had the Sundays where guys would write letters home and whatnot. I'd write mine to Wayne and Kathy and the girl I was with at the time. But like I never was like sad. I guess there was a lot of people at boot camp, especially the initial first couple of weeks, because that's the most difficult, biggest change in some of those guys' lives. Like they, majority of them, came from different types of homes and backgrounds. Either single parent homes or loving homes, but they'd established their routine in life before that, and this was just like a whole shakeup for them. And with me, I've never really had a strong routine per se, so it was just another adventure, I guess, for me. So sometimes when people like would get sad with that, I definitely didn't have sympathy. I was just kind of confused by it. It's like, what are you talking about? You're missing home. I mean, you got everything you need here. You got 3 meals a day. You got they tell you when to go to bed and when to wake up. You just got to do what you're told and try not to be an idiot about it. But yeah, no, it was weird. I didn't experience that whole missing home syndrome type feeling. Well, I did well into my Navy career when I actually started getting my own kind of roots in home and family started. But early on through boot camp and training and stuff, I never had that feeling like, man, I really miss home. Am I making the right choice kind of mindset?
Well, and that kind of goes forward. We don't have to talk about Buds. Buds has been talked to death about. Everyone understands how hard it is. The one question I do want to ask you, though, is like you said, with not having that routine, not having necessarily missing that family life and stuff, I don't know if I want to use the word easier, but do you think that it made the transition going through Buds, going through training and everything that you're going through, I guess the word easier than it would be for someone else because you're not really thinking about anything else other than accomplishing that?
Yeah, the Buds process, as far as mentally for me, I never really thought about quitting because I was missing something or I felt out of place or I felt like I was in the wrong situation. Like I said, it was a new chapter, new adventure in my life. I never really focused on looking back or going backwards. I was like, man, I'm here. I'm going forwards. I'm gonna keep pushing forward. Yeah, and during the whole process, there was never a doubt or, man, did I make the right choice kind of deal. It was like I always, from the beginning when I joined Navy boot camp and stepped off that bus at Great Lakes, it was like this is the only choice. Like I had it in my mind, or I convinced myself there was no going back, and to embrace whatever had come at me moving forward. So yeah, no, it was the reason why people ask me, how'd you make it through Buds? Like, what was the secret? And I was like, everybody has their own sauce, I guess, on how they mentally prepared for it. But for me personally, I never thought about going back. I never thought about quitting because it didn't seem like an option really for me. I mean, even though the instructors would yell at you every 30 seconds, like, hey, to make the pain and suffering go away, all I had to do was quit. I was like, I kind of would think about to like that first week of college, like, man, I don't want to feel lonely again and just out of place and not know what to do next. I was like, at least if I don't quit, I know exactly what I'm going to do next. It's going to suck, but I know the next step in this process is, Hell Week. And after that, it's Hydro Hell Week. And then after that, it's dive phase. Like I knew the process. And I guess knowing that process was more comfortable mentally than not knowing what would happen afterwards. It's like, man, I don't know where I would go if I did quit. And I sure as hell don't want to find out.
Well, and I would think even going so far as to saying, when people are yelling at you and they're treating you bad, whatever, it's a mental thing, it's a physical thing, but I can only imagine knowing you in your mind. You're like, I carried my belongings in a fucking banana box. There's nothing you can do to me to top that kind of stuff. Was that ever a kind of thought in your head?
Yeah. I was definitely the guy that took everything with humor going through training. because no matter what they threatened me physically with and yelled at me and tried to belittle me, I was like, man, I experienced like 10 times worth that as a kid, at different homes and different processes. I was, physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally and mentally abused as a kid. And I kind of worked through that process and got over that. But like in buds, they were there to make sure that you were, mentally tough enough to, adhere through adversity. And I was like, man, this is pretty much a cakewalk mentally anyways. Physically, obviously it's some of the hardest stuff I've ever done on earth, but mentally it was nowhere close to or even scratched the surface on what I experienced and gotten through as a kid. So it was comforting, I guess is the best way to put it, because there was reasoning at least behind what the buds instructors and all the cadre and all those guys were doing. Like, and I understood that reason. I was like, the reason why they're doing this is to make sure that when I go to combat, that I come back home and I can protect the brothers beside me. Obviously, as a kid going through all that stuff, that's why they call it abuse. There's no reason for it.
And I can only imagine, like I ask you about all the people around you, when there's whining or when there's this and that, I can only imagine that you're like, okay, can we do something else? Because we're just wasting time worrying about this. When you graduate, I think we should point out that you were rolled, correct? From 251 to 252. You got rolled because of an injury, correct?
Yeah, during Hell Week, lots of boats on heads and logs and stuff. One of the I don't know if it was the boat or the log, but it came down funny on my neck, and it caused like a pinched nerve on my neck. In a matter of minutes, my whole arm started going numb and I couldn't use it, like completely lost function on it. So it's just hanging there. I'm trying to hold up the log because we always move from boat to log, especially during that time in Hell Week. I think we were about to secure them. Boat crews yelling at me, stop sandbagging because I'm not picking up any of the weight or as much as I could with one arm. Instructors call me over, try to make me bear crawl over. I can't bear crawl too well, especially Tuesday, Wednesday of Hell Week on one arm. Do some push-ups in the surf, and medical checks me out, and they're like, yeah, you got a pinched nerve in your neck. It's one of those things. It's hard to tell how long it'll last. It could last 20 minutes. It could last 2 weeks. It could last 2 months. It could last the rest of your life. Obviously, you can't continue with Hell Week, so we got to roll you, and you kind of wait and see how that turns out. That was a tough little experience because that watched 251 finish Hell Week. I kind of assisted with that because I was a white shirt rollback. So we prepped for those guys, seeing all those guys that were my classmates for the at least past month plus, because we did NDOC together as well. And they kept moving on, and I had to restart with the second class from NDOC day one, week one NDOC phase. It was tough until I reclassed up and got back together with the guys. Once that process started again, they're definitely, I want to say easier, but it was I knew what was coming. As far as each evolution in each day. So it was more comforting, I guess. I wasn't so anxious or stressed out that second time around, at least when I got through Hell Week. After that, it was all a mystery to me, and it just was the same. Hey, we're in buds together. So, but yeah, no, Tuesday, like almost halfway through Hell Week, got that nerve injury and had to start all over again with 252.
As you graduate, 2005 to 2009, you're West Coast. You supported Iraqi Freedom, 2 deployments with West Coast, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about you as a person. First deployment, second deployment. Do you feel a change in you? Do you feel patriotic? Or I talked to a guy a while ago that said after he started moving through all of these deployments he did, after a while he was like, it was not forgotten country anymore. It was, it had changed. Your first deployment, how are you going in? What's your mental state on it? And you're the elite of the elite now.
I was still in the mindset of, earn your trident every day. Brand new guy, 0 deployments. I was looking at all the guys because when I joined with the team, those guys had just gotten back from Iraq right when I finished all my schooling and whatnot, and I checked in. They were just getting off of their post-deployment leave, back in it. And I remember meeting one guy. This was his second platoon, so his first rotation. I met my LPO. He'd been on like 5 already. Mr. Matt Lenig, great great LPO. I still talk to him. He's down there in Houston. Now, it was different. Like I was expecting like to be immediately taped to the wall and get my eyebrows shaved and stuff. That didn't happen until later. But the first day, it was everybody's treating you like a professional. Like, hey, you got all your stuff checked in. The guys making sure I have what I have to get started, getting me through gear and stuff, because you had to go through the whole gambit of getting all your team gear checked in, your deployment gear, and make sure your cage is squared away, and start all the admin processes to get that through, because shortly after that we started hit the ground running with workup and different training trips and whatnot. Now every day, I tried to show up to work no matter what, with my mouth closed and ears open and my eyes open. I wanted to take on what I could, try to gravitate towards the breaching side of the house. I was interested in the breaching side. I wanted to do the sniper route, but those spots usually fill up pretty fast. And there was either comms, which is, you carry at the time as a prick
77, shouldn't it have been?
Prick 198 or something. Is the one with the big batteries. It was definitely heavy. And I didn't want to do that. And I didn't want to talk on the radio. And I was like, I want to blow stuff up. That's kind of cool. I watched that movie with Sylvester Stallone in it. That was cool. Anyways, but he...
I got to ask you about the radio. You guys didn't even have SINGARs then?
No,
you're
not
talking,
then. It was 2003,
golly.
it was 2004, 2005. Yeah, we had the big old is basically a brick, and everybody carried the spare batteries because those things would eat through batteries like nobody's business, and those batteries itself were like 5 to 10 pounds each.
Yeah.
So the comms guy definitely had to have a strong back. But going through training, I was actually gained size as far as muscle mass during buds and SQT, just because initially was so skinny, and I just started consuming every piece of food item that I get my hands on. I probably ate 5,000-6,000 calories a day, but we needed to. I was eating 3 or 4 times a day, monstrous meals. So I joined boot camp in buds. I was like 145, 150, and I graduated at like 195. I was pretty lean.
Shit.
They were wanting me to carry the heavy gun and stuff through most of the advanced training stuff. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed carrying the pig. But I wanted to do the breacher aspect too. So immediately when I checked in the team, I latched on to some of the breacher guys and started questioning them. It's like, hey, I want to go to breacher school whenever, but this is what I want to do. So I started the breaching and ordnance route. But no, my mentality, especially as a new guy, was, man, I still haven't earned my place. I may have had a trident on my chest, but in my eyes, I wanted to earn the actual call sign on my shoulder, which is basically just a spot on the team. Just because I was wearing a trident didn't mean I was a salter or a Navy SEAL. It just meant that I made it through a program and earned a badge. But I wanted to earn that piece of equipment every day, earn my call sign, and be an actual like Charlie platoon member.
Do you ever run across in the beginning, you wanted to be quiet, you wanted to latch on to these guys. Do you run across people that have an ego when they get there, that thought they knew it, or was it pretty much everyone was quiet?
Man, at that time, there wasn't too many egos at that time. Like I remember there was a little shift when we got our own rate and they started doing their special boot camp for guys. There was some ego coming out because they started treating them special, like right at boot camp. That was a couple of years in my career, and kind of seeing some of those guys, you're like, man, I would never like question something I didn't know about, but B, trying to just flex ego on guys that have already been overseas, especially now because it was a wartime deployment. It wasn't like the 90s where guys had never been to war and all of a sudden I'm getting to a platoon and they're telling me how war is going to be. These guys, I think part of the reason why these guys, especially the guys that I was with, were so awesome was because they literally just got back from Fallujah. Like it was a dick dragger. Those guys were no shit in the shit. And that's all units that were overseas over that time. So Mark Lee was in 251 with me, and he was the first one that died overseas as far as SEALs went in Iraq. I mean, the big push through Fallujah, Chris Kyle was on that one before the Mark Lee came on that one. That's when the Marines were pushing through Fallujah with all their stuff, and a lot of those guys provided overwatch and cleared houses with them and were taking stuff down. Like, I remember one of the first speeches that I got from my LPO was like everyone's everyone's fighting right now. It's not like there was a lull in anything, and only like tier 1 units were doing stuff. I know those guys, when they came back, super professional, definitely made sure to tell us, like, hey, this is what we expect of you. You guys don't know shit. And I took it to heart. I was like, I don't know shit. You're right. Let's make sure I do know something before I get over there. So, but yeah, egos weren't. I don't know, the small group of new guys that I was with, as far as my troop and my platoon. There wasn't any egos with that group, but you definitely heard about guys that had a little bit of ego, or some guys were sometimes disrespectful to them, even though you're a one platoon guy or an older guy. Some new guys would be like, hey, I'm still a grown man. You shouldn't disrespect me, and to get put in their place and realize that, I guess I need some disrespect to make sure that I understand what's going on.
When does it become real for you? You said you were over there with the first guy to die with that. When does it become real for you? Like, when do you really think, like you always said, you were trying, you went through the school, you earned your trident, but you were really trying to become that call sign and stuff. When does it become real where you're like, holy shit, it's all culminated in this?
Well, so we were waiting to deploy, because, like I said, we usually turn over with Team 3, so Task Force Provers were over there. I remember hearing when Mark Lee got killed. I attended his funeral before my first deployment. That's when it was like super real. Mark Lee, Mikey Mansour, and then seeing Job come back getting shot. All three of those guys were new guys. So that was like a realism that set in personally for me, because being a new guy, I was like, man, everyone's in the action. It's not like the new guys sitting in the jock letting all the senior guys hit the targets. Like, they needed every guy, and there's a reason why we trained so hard for these past 3 to 4 years to get to the spot. Is we're going to the show. Like, we're going to be at the kicking indoors, and there's guys going to be wanting to shoot us in the face. Going in there, I remember descending down to Iraq when our first go in. They dimmed all the lights because they had to go black, so they when they go in, they wouldn't get shot at with mortars. We landed. I remember getting out looking goofy because I felt like I was going to, in a scene from Platoon or something, like somebody started immediately shooting at me, but we were on an air base behind some pretty good guards. We got in a Humvee, went outside the wire, and got to our first little base in Havania for my first deployment.
What do you remember the most about it? I know you say you remember the first time you're there, but when you look back on that first deployment, what's the biggest thing you remember from it?
I guess just the sense of calmness I had with everybody around me. Like, the amount of confidence and training we went into beforehand, and when we got there, and when we started executing targets, it's just like all the training made sense, and seeing those guys operate, and the men I got to work with. I mean, that's the best thing is how much I learned about A, just being a man in general, but B, being a team player, and C, just what a warrior should look like, and what being in combat is. Yeah, no, the biggest thing is just the guys I got to be with. It was a once in a lifetime experience. Each deployment, believe it or not, I was always a once in a lifetime experience, because each deployment I had was a different flavor, a different group, and it was always a learning experience. But it was a good one. It's unforgettable for sure.
When you're going through all of your different deployments, and you say you know what it looks like to be a warrior and stuff, does it change who you are on the outside? Not when you're in combat, when you're back in the States, when you're on vacation, when you're not doing Navy SEAL stuff, does it change who you are fundamentally, or do you think you stay who you are just with that edge to you now?
For me personally, it definitely edged me up a little bit. I didn't really change too much. Well, I don't want to say that, because it definitely changed a whole different perspective on things. You definitely get rubbed off on different guys, like different guys rub off on you. So different mindsets and outlooks and perceptions on different things. Hanging out with just those guys and just those guys alone, you always will take a piece of each guy that I've ever worked with. I've taken a piece with me, good, bad, or indifferent, on how I do things or how I don't do things, because of how each of those guys did something in a platoon overall. So no, it definitely changed me. Not completely, because I'm still got some goofiness in me, and I've always had that since I was a kid. But it definitely made me stand taller, I guess. Definitely more confident, and definitely more perceptive of different people.
When you talk about perceptive, do you change your ideology, your politics of the world when you actually see it on right in front of your face? When you go to Iraq, when you go to Afghanistan, have you changed over the years your look on the world? Because we talk about it a lot on the show, and I say when you've been a cop for 15, 20, 25 years, your view definitely changes on the world.
Yeah, we definitely live in a bubble here in the United States. We get a lot of comfort and things allotted to us. The whole Bill of Rights and Constitution is very unique to our part of the world. And it's very apparent when you go overseas to different countries and you see the people's the struggles and their beliefs. Same thing growing up as a foster kid. I went through so many different churches, based the religion topic. So I was exposed to Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, Protestant, and definitely talking to different kids in the foster care system with different backgrounds, different religions. I kind of established my own opinion and I guess take on the religious portions, and so going to different parts of the world and seeing actual different extreme religions, and not just Christianity, but that affects how people live their day-to-day life, their belief system, their their morals and whatnot. It definitely changed my perspective of like the world as a whole, not in a bad way, just how what people do to survive, pretty much, whether that's a belief or a hope or a faith, or training or any other aspect. People do what they need to survive and coexist as best as possible, and it's all about survivability, pretty much.
Okay, so with 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 deployments to Iraq, differences that you notice in the 2 deployments?
To Iraq, or the two different regions?
2 different regions. What do you notice is the difference? What do you notice is the different mission set, different ideals, different goals? What is it that stands out to you of the 2 different, because you're seeing completely 2 different things going on?
One group was more self-motivated and ideologically driven, and another group is more fear-driven. I don't know. We got more, like, Iraq was more small, low-level fear-driven stuff, survivability type stuff. I mean, there were definitely threats, but like Afghanistan was definitely more of like the core beliefs and their being was in it. Like, they were more motivated fighters than the Iraqis were, as far as the target sets we did. Yeah, and I think that's just based on who they were, what they were fighting for, and also, I mean, the units I was with, our target packages were a little more higher up and more fine-tuned than some of the stuff we did when I was in Iraq.
As you're moving through your ranks, you're of course going up through the ranks, and I want to get into your injuries in just a second. Do you think the role that you're doing is changing? Of course it is with rank, but do you think the role of what you're doing over there is changing?
Yes and no. So getting older and becoming a breacher, like our mission set from the first deployment to Iraq and second deployment, went from target sets and kill capture type stuff. Second deployment was a little more hearts and minds, trying to stabilize the region. I mean, we still hit targets, but it was a different deal. And then the unit I went with to Afghanistan was back to targeting specific cells, specific individuals. And really wasn't a whole lot of hearts and minds stuff, because that was what the group that I was with that was designed to do. Yeah, it was just different mission sets, so it all depended on what was going on and what we needed to do.
Let's talk about your injuries. You suffered some pretty catastrophic injuries. They didn't seem to stop you for too long. You bounced back from them after rehab and stuff. Can we talk about the injuries, how you got them, and then how you kind of moved through them?
Yeah. So I just made it through selection and training, green team, October 2009. I got to my squadron. I got my orders. Super stoked. definitely the epitome, the peak of my career, and at the time of my life. Getting to that level in the SEAL community is something that few aspired, because it seems very impossible, but even fewer actually make it. Most of those guys that go through that selection, or all the guys that go through that selection, they're required to have at least 2 combat deployments, and they have to be somebody that has a good reputation in their team, in their troop. So even if you were a solid operator in your mind and did well, if you weren't a good team player and your LPO in chief was like, this guy is never around when the work bell calls, or after duty, he's always punching in, punching out as quickly as possible. Guys like that don't even make it to selection. So it's really high level guys that start that selection process, and at the end, it reminds me of the attrition rate of buds. Sometimes, like, we started 70, 80 guys, and like only 25 made it through the initial selection. So I checked into my squadron, super stoked about that. Same thing. I'm like back to new guy phase. I got my mouth shut, eyes and ears open, because these guys were like, no shit, like what you would envision the best the world has to offer, not just the U.S. military, but in my mind, the world has to offer on our military side of the house. Like, I wouldn't want to be on that anywhere close to the other side of their assault force. So I was very fortunate to be there. Started the workup process, and it's like the second trip in, January 2010. Shattered my left leg on a jump. We were doing some free fall training for a workup. Miscalculated some of the winds at altitude. A good number of us landed off DZ. I just was over a bunch of trees because of kind of where I placed myself to line up with the drop zone. I thought I was going to get stuck in some of the trees, so I kind of was aiming myself close to the edge of the tree line. That way, if I did get stuck, they wouldn't have to bushwhack all the way to get me cut down. Because in all the parachute training and free fall training we did, they're like, you'll basically get stuck in trees and just don't cut yourself away and fall to the ground. They'll come and get you out in the event you get stuck up there. But I didn't. I went through the top of those trees, collapsed my parachute, and I shot straight through them and hit some pavement because I was trying to land close to a roadway so they could pick me up. And sure enough, I slammed on the pavement and shattered my left leg, broke my back. I was really didn't know the extent at the time. I thought I just broke it. I didn't realize I actually did way worse than I did to my leg. Went to Portsmouth. They flew me back. Doc told me at the time that I'd done some serious damage to my left leg. I was going to require multiple surgeries, and I probably wouldn't be doing my job again. At first, I didn't believe him. After the second or third surgery, and like the fourth or fifth week laying up in the Navy hospital, because I literally was stuck on my back with my foot in this X-fix for 6-7 weeks. It started semi-wearing on me, but I kept telling myself that this can't be the end of this journey that I'm on, because I worked so hard to get there. The doc fixed me up as best he could. It was like, hey, I'm at least afforded my physical therapy. The guys at the command there, the physical therapist and the sports rehab guys are bar none some of the best guys in the world, because those guys definitely not only helped me get back to where I needed to be with the squadrons, but they did it day in and day out. That was my primary focus, besides crutching around for 3 to 4 months and trying to learn what I could as far as being in the squadrons. But I had some points where I was kind of self-doubting, but the guys in the second deck were, there's so many guys with so many different injuries, because our job, just the training itself and some of the workups for some of our missions are high risk, some of the highest risk you'll do with any other job profession in the world. Talking to a guy named Turbo, who actually got his leg shot off, and a lot of other guys are like, hey, this isn't the end. There's options for you, but you just can't, don't give up yet. So that was reassuring and reoccurring, and just that drive, the fact that I still had that fire in my gut from selection and wanting to be there, kind of helped me through the rehab process and pushed me. And I was able to deploy within 8 months of breaking my leg, which I thought was a feat into itself, especially since I was told I wasn't going to be able to walk again to actually deploying with the unit that I did. So, no, that was that kind of shook my world there for a second. And then 2 years later, a couple more deployments, another jump trip. We were doing some high altitude jumping. And high altitude jumping, you're actually falling faster and kind of cutting through the air a little faster than normal. I wasn't really tracking my altimeter when I was making a flat turn to line up with the final leg of my jump there. Was lined up with the ambulance SUV that was sitting on the side of the drop zone. Immediately thought that would be a bad day if I smashed through the windshield of that. So I tried to aim between some of our ISUs. They're called individual storage units with all our gear in it. My plan in my head in the 5 to 10 seconds that I had was to kind of glide between them and then have a little bit more distance to stop. But I broke the first rule of Fight Club, which is don't look at what you don't want to hit. And so I looked right at that ISU, and I got the video because I was wearing a GoPro at the time. You could see my left hand dip right at that ISU because I looked at it, and I started heading right towards it. Last second, I threw up my legs because I was coming at it so fast. I originally wanted to go like this and tuck in and smash into it. But I was like, man, I better throw up my legs because this looks like it's going to hurt. And I did. Last second, I put my feet up. My left leg bounced off because of all the nice hardware the Navy installed in there 2 years earlier. Then my right leg completely gave way, broke my foot off, and basically did the same, if not worse, that I did my left leg to my right, shattered all the bones above the ankle. And I was so angry when that happened that I initially didn't feel the pain just because I was so angry and disappointed in myself that I'd let it happen again. Like I had like 550 jumps in the military and only had 2 bad jumps, like where I was like nervous. And those were the ones that ended up being catastrophic. Like every other time, jumping at night in the stack, all these, like, I remember jumping over the Grand Canyon and landing on this tiny peak up in Flagstaff. And I was never nervous or scared in my ability or capability. But those one times, they were both on a Friday, and it was like the last jumps of the day. And we were about to break for the weekend and, go to Hooters and get wings and beer and all that stuff. And I ended up destroying my leg, both those occasions, 2 years apart. And that second time initially, that first, 3 to 4 months, same thing. I laid in the hospital 6, 7, 8 weeks, multiple surgeries on that one as well, plates and screws in both legs to kind of hold the bones together. It's funny, the same doc came walking in, the same Navy doctor, was shaking his head, and he goes, I just saw you here recently, like a year and a half, 2 years ago. You had to go do the same thing to your other leg. And I was like, well, you did such a good job on the left leg. That's the only reason why it's still attached. He was like, man, I don't know what to tell you. I told you last time that you probably wouldn't walk again, but this one's like twice as worse. And I was like, well, just put me back together. We're going to keep pushing. I got no more legs to break, so I should be good to go. But this one took a little bit longer to kind of heal up. I actually had to spend a little bit of the next deployment in D.C. doing a desk job until they cleared me. But they ended up going back to finishing the deployment in Afghanistan with the troop that was out there. There's just the bad thing about the amount of damage I did to my ankles and my bones, and the amount of hardware that was in there. He told me, I was like, you won't last too much longer in your career just because it's so hard on your body in general. But what you did to your legs and the amount of hardware you're going, this stuff's going to end up shifting, or it's going to bother you. But sure enough, after my next deployment after that, I came home and I was like, man, I'm having a lot of pain in my ankles. You mind checking it out? And they're like, it's probably just the damage you did. It's starting to deteriorate a little bit. You're probably getting some bone on bone stuff. But come to find out that one of the screws on the plate had worked its way into my ankle joint space and was just free floating in there. So a tiny little sharp screw was inside my ankle joint. And every time I took a step, it was just like digging canyons in my bones. So he went in there originally just to scope it out and clean it out. Ended up having to do full surgery again, and ended up getting stuck in another X-fix. And same thing. It's like, you're probably going to have to do this repeatedly because the amount of demand you put on your body overseas is going to do hell, not only on previous injuries, but especially on these injuries because of what you're asking your body to do. You're running around with, at the time I was like 230, I'm about 230 now, but 230, but with kit on, they call it helicopter weight. My helicopter weight, since I was a heavy gunner, was about 310. So I was running around like 310 pounds. The joke was if I ever got shot or went down, just to leave me there, I'd just lay on top of a grenade and get the first guy to try to roll me over, because there's no way I was going to they were going to drag my big ass out. No, 2015, after that last deployment I did at the squadrons, had to have another surgery, another X-fix, another 3 to 4 months on a crutches. And then that's when the Navy was like, we can't in good conscience get you deployable again, because you're just going to keep hitting the same process and you won't walk when you're 40. So we're going to have to medically retire you. And so 2017, that's what they did.
Can I ask you a question, though? Because when you said that, you said on that second injury, the second jump, when you hit the ground, you were so angry you didn't feel it. Do you remember what you were angry at? Were you angry at yourself, the injury? What was it?
I was angry at myself. I was like, I can't believe I broke my leg again, because it's all about showing up with those guys, right? It wasn't about earning the trident. I was a different part of my career, so we were earning our spot in the squadron. So I had to earn that patch every day. Like if I wanted to be there, I could leave the command anytime I want. It was all voluntary, and they take that patch with me. I can always have that trident, but taking that patch away was something that I held more near and dear than I did any other thing in the world, because that was just to earn the spot at the table. It didn't guarantee me anything. So every training trip, every rep was just to continue earning that spot at that table. Stuff like that, injury or not, guys would still be hard on themselves, because it's a mess up, and it's a big one, because it took me out of the fight. And I wasn't available to support my brothers in the way that I'd trained all this time for. So I was angry at myself. I was pissed, but I definitely, looking down at it, and saw my foot hanging off and my shoe, everything kind of rushing in, and definitely started feeling that pain. But initially I was very, very angry. I was pissed.
So I've got to understand, when you say, you weren't showing up to earn the trident anymore, you were earning your seat at the table. You've got to think that you didn't really fail anyone. I mean, it was a catastrophic failure. You didn't fail anyone. So that's where I've got to understand the mind state behind that, because you really didn't fail anyone. You didn't even really fail yourself.
Yeah. I never would say I didn't think about, because like I said, from day one of BUDS, it's earn your trident every day. But as you progress through your career, it's your trident plus, your call sign patch, or your troop patch, or your squadron patch. But it's especially the level of guys and training we were at, mistake, injury or not, there's some level of choices that I made to get to that point that I could have done differently. Obviously hindsight's always 20/20. Like conducting that flat turn on final should have been a poor choice. I was trying to avoid another guy that was coming in behind me. I didn't want to cut him off. But at the same time, there was other avenues of approach I should have done, higher up kind of deal. And that was just something that we all always train to do. Like, there's a series of choices that you make before you get to whatever point in time you're in. And each of those choices you had beforehand affects where you're at today. So, I mean, you take somebody getting a flat tire on the side of the road, you're like, oh man, that's unfortunate. And there's a series of events that could have you done as a person that could have avoided that situation, such as being on top of how your tires are wearing, making stuff, you're taking care of your vehicle, going, you know what, these tires are getting pretty thin. Maybe I should buy some new tires. Or that person that goes on that long road trip and they end up running out of gas because they weren't paying attention to their gas deal. It's like, well, they probably passed 10, 15 gas stations they could have at least topped off before they got to that point. I don't know. It's just the way I always kind of viewed, especially at that level of my career and that level of professionalism, even though it was a horrible accident, just the small details of, I shouldn't have been looking at that ISU. I should have just stuck with my plan. And it's something that I conducted, free fall jumps after that. And that was always something that definitely was a hard lesson learned was, hey, do not stare at what you don't want to hit when you're controlling any type of device, whether it's a vehicle or a canopy. So the initial impact, I was super angry because I knew exactly what had happened. I'd looked right at that thing, and that my injury was my own. It definitely was something that I probably could have avoided. I definitely could have avoided if I made different choices higher up in the air. But yeah, I mean, that eventually we're off. Guys were like, "Hey, you definitely don't blame yourself and whatnot." But at the end of the day, I held myself to a different standard and was like, I'm sorry. I let you guys down by hurting myself and being out of the fight and being out of the rest of the workup. So
Well, let me ask you too. You said you had done over 500 jumps. There was only two where you, and I don't know exactly how you described it, where you felt uncomfortable or you felt
well,
uneasy
just two.
about it.
Yeah, just two. Like some people when they do skydives, they're like, oh, that last one was a close call. I got a hard landing, or my parachute kind of didn't do what it was supposed to do in the air, or hey, I had to go to my reserve, or hey, I landed off DZ because of my pattern was wrong. Not before that, the most majority of my jumps or my, I want to say textbook, but they were pretty spot on. Like I didn't really have anything where I was like, man, I really messed up on that jump because I landed far away from the group, or my skills in the air were bad. No, usually, I mean, I was very nervous and uncomfortable in a healthy way when I skydived. Like I respected it more. I definitely wasn't one of those guys that wanted to do a lot of extra free fall jumps for fun, just because falling through the air didn't excite me as much as it did some other guys. But it definitely didn't make me nervous where I was constantly making mistakes or just a soup sandwich in the air. But everyone's going to have a bad jump, especially the types of jumps we were doing. So it just happened to be that the two bad jumps I had happened to shatter my legs.
Can we talk about the grenade explosion?
It was, man, it was so minor. I was kind of frustrated in general with
Well,
how.
I bring it up because it's always funny how you mention this because you received a Purple Heart for this one. And you talk about these catastrophic skydiving injuries. And then when you talk about this one, you're like, yeah, it really wasn't anything. I don't know why they did anything for it.
Well, because the other guys that were on the ground, because there was like six of us that were kind of close to that grenade, but or yeah, the other four that was right on top of it ate most of that grenade. Me and another guy kind of got some frag from it, but we didn't have to get medevaced out for it. Like it was much later when we got back after the mission. I was like, man, I got some stuff stuck in me, and they checked it out, pulled it out, and it was like barely anything, but the fact it was a grenade explosion next to during a combat mission, it's all the wickets for a Purple Heart. So obviously most guys probably the same thing with minor injuries, especially because mine was super minor. Felt like that, like guys. My buddy Will has a big old hole in his butt cheek that we'd actually would make fun of him with it because he was pretty much sitting on top of it. If it wasn't like wet and damp ground and that thing didn't sink into the ground, it probably would have turned out way worse for all of us. But no, for that piece, I was on target. A grenade came through the window. I heard the window break. I didn't actually see it, but I knew exactly what it was because we engaged a guy that was kind of peeking around through the window on a target we were hitting, and it kind of set everything off in motion after that grenade went off. Like I said, I feel ridiculous talking about it sometimes because it was such a minor deal, but in all aspects, it was a wound established in combat. So.
And the reason I bring it up was exactly for that reason, because we look at these other injuries that you got that could have ended your career. You get a Purple Heart off that one, and you kind of shy away from it, even though it was deserved, but you shy away from it. And I've always thought that was kind of cool about how you look at those kind of injuries, and kind of the scale that you put your injuries on, because we talk about other ones and 10 months of rehab and all that kind of stuff. Can we talk a little bit about when you get out? Because talking about those injuries, that's why they medically retire you out. But you don't really leave the world. And this is where I want to ask you. You kind of, you subcontract out, you're doing training, personal security, consulting. Did you ever worry when you got out and you were doing those things that I really haven't left that lifestyle? I'm still continuing to push and I'm not looking for new stuff to do.
Yeah, definitely was. I wasn't ready to get out of the military mentally. Was not prepared. Once I joined and kind of was in the path I was in, I was going for 20 to 25. I wanted to make it to Master Chief, the E9 spot somewhere in a leadership position. So when they told me they were going to medically retire me, and I couldn't make rank anymore because I was undeployable, and that was kind of one of the big things is I don't want to be undeployable because it's kind of makes you not look the best, in my opinion, amongst the teams, and you can't really work your way up in leadership positions if you're non-deployable anymore. So no, I got out, and it was the easy button. Most guys in my background, we either do ground branch stuff or something along the lines of government contracting, or the private sector with weapons and tactics training and whatnot. So that's kind of the way I went. Just because my injuries, I wasn't sure if I could make it any of the government contracting stuff, and I didn't want to test it. So yeah, no, I did around subcontracting for folks, guys that already had established companies, doing weapons and tactics training. But I did discover some guys that I did that was doing some scuba diving with. And that kind of gave me a little bit of a newer purpose. It was all voluntary with Warfighter Scuba. Saw a newsletter from the VA that the VA kind of blasted out, trying to get some recognition to the organization, but they had already promised the organization some funding for the influx of guys that was going to sign up for it, but kind of fell through. But that's the VA. But I reached out to the guy that was running that organization, and it kind of tied back to why I joined the Navy. Like I love the water. I was super stoked to be paid and learned how to scuba dive, but none of those Navy certifications transfers directly to civilian side. So even though I had, same thing with skydiving, probably just as many scuba dives underneath my belt, and most of it was at night on a rebreather, kicking through an empty ocean with a tack board in front of my face, not really sightseeing anything. Reached out to Mr. Nick Powers, kind of told him my situation, asked if not only if I didn't really want to take a spot for what the nonprofit was designed to do. Basically, it's designed for guys with Purple Heart and their injured veterans to for basically therapeutic stuff, kind of seeing guys that are stuck in wheelchairs or stuck always in constant pain being in the water. It's pretty magical without sounding too gay about it, but it's pretty inspiring to see like guys actually establish some self-freedom again. Because a lot of guys that get hurt, especially guys with Purple Hearts, like they're seriously injured, missing limbs and stuck in wheelchairs or in constant pain. Like they always have to depend on somebody to help them out. But with scuba diving, especially with me too, with my injuries, it's like this is the only thing I can do that doesn't hurt. So I reached out and I was like, hey, this is my background experience. I'd love to be an instructor for you and kind of help with this organization. And he was all on board. So he let me go through the program, and basically threw every little certification test and evaluation at me that first week to kind of see where I was at and see if I was really serious about it. And kind of been doing that with them. That's all voluntary, but sticking with the weapons and tactics world, I've bounced around from couple different gigs, and now currently linked up with some guys I used to be in the Navy with, DJ and Cole with GBRS Group, and currently I'm running their department head as far as their training and development. So that's a good thing.
Well, and we should also point out that you've done executive protection for Super Bowl teams. As a matter of fact, 3 Super Bowl teams. And you've really, I'm glad that you brought up the scuba diving, because we'll, of course, put a link to it. But it's when you talk about it and you say these guys, they really can't do anything without being in pain, and that scuba kind of opens all that up for them. I almost think back to when you talked about being lonely. That can get very lonely when you can't do anything, and then you can get into a group and go do that. Do you think that's a big part of what drives you on that?
Yeah, especially with the veterans. I know getting back to the civilian world, it was like that feeling like when I went to college. I felt super alone, like wasn't connected to anybody, including my family. My wife and kids at the time were pretty small, but still I felt surrounded by people, because I moved back to Oklahoma to be closer to some of the family that I found along my journey from foster homes to adults. but I still felt alone, and I definitely understand that feeling because it's a common feeling for guys getting out of the military, kind of going from that group that everybody's that same mindset, that same mentality, that same dark humor or whatever, making fun of the things that most people kind of look at you funny for, especially when you're wounded. Like you get even more kind of distant
Dark.
from you definitely get way darker. So what drew me to the scuba diving program, obviously with kind of establishing some of those self-independence thing, but also that connection with those guys that are like twice removed as far as the separation and loneliness. I feel like I understand it a little better than most just because of kind of how I was raised as a child and experiencing bouncing around from home to home and that disconnect with people and society in general.
I think that's the perfect segue to talk about kind of our final things, and it's family, being with your wife, your kids, and things that have gone on there. I want to point out something because of all your stories that you and I have talked about on the side without this show. I think the coolest thing about you is this thing when you received an honor from the borough of Longport, right?
Yep, New Jersey.
Yeah. So the mayor states in this meeting, he said, I never saw Joe in the performance of his duties, but in the past week, I saw him in the performance of his fatherly duties. And from what I saw, these kids couldn't ask for a better dad. And this is the coolest thing to me because you really, up until that final 50th home, you have no background to go on being a father. You really don't. No background on being a husband. There's nothing really there. And even that 50th home is a very short time. It was, I think at most, 3 years, 3 years?
Yeah, it's about two years max, I think.
So there's not a real background, but you have thrived in it. And I have told you this before. I think it's the coolest thing about you, how you do this stuff and how you've really taken on this role. So can we talk about what it means to be a father, to be there all the time for your kids and to be there for your wife in everything that you're doing?
With how I was raised and kind of not having anybody to anchor to is one of those things that I was immediately like, hey, that will never happen with anybody in my little circle. And to be a dad, no matter what that looks like, will not look like what I didn't have growing up. It's kind of observing what I didn't want to see as far as father figures and stuff is the exact opposite of what's driving me to do what I am now. I mean, there's definitely times, especially with my military service and whatnot, where I wish I could show up better for my wife and kids sometimes. But majority of the time, it definitely is what regrounds me and recenters me. Seeing those boys every day, from my oldest who's 16 to my youngest who's 5. I got 4 of them, but each one of them, hearing their voice, hearing them call me dad, it definitely is one of my greatest accomplishments, I think. And it's something that I'll definitely be more proud of than any accomplishment that I personally did. So like when all those boys turn 18 and start their new lives with however they do, I think will be the epitome and the greatest accomplishment in my life, no matter what I've done before, just because how close and how much pride I try to take in that position as a father.
Let's talk about your wife a little bit. As we know, you lost your mom to cancer, 4 years old. With your wife, October 11th, 2019, she was diagnosed with cancer, colorectal stage 3. I've got to understand, and I think the people listening to this have to understand, you've built this life. You've gone from the mess that it was to what you have now. And you're right on the brink of losing all that again. Can you walk us through how you feel about it, what you went through, and how you kind of got through it?
The lowest, it was definitely probably the lowest, scariest point in my life, period. I remember my mom going through all those treatments and stuff, and then seeing her going through that was tough. Tough is such a simple word to say it, but man, it was scary. actual flashbacks of when I was a kid. At the time, my three boys were the exact same age as me and my brother and sister were when she was going through that. So, man, it scared me because it's one of those things that was completely out of my control. And all I could think about, obviously at the time was my boys kind of going through the process that I did. But it was, it's still kind of held fast in my resolve was because of those boys. I didn't want to end up like my dad. I wasn't going to lose them if in the event that something happened where I would lose her. And so I was struggling at the time before that diagnosis, just with the transition out of the military, still kind of in a dark place, just being lonely in general and disconnected from them. She got that diagnosis that kind of brought me back to reality and stopped, focusing so much on how sad or bad I feel bad for myself with my crap, and kind of definitely refocused my energy on just my overall life and value as a human in general, which is being a dad and being a husband. So while she was sick, I tried to not focus on the what ifs as much as the what was happening at that point in time. And the biggest thing was keeping those boys in focus and not losing sight of, at the time, they're just little. So them just being kids. So she was going through her treatments, taking her back and forth there, making sure that they were taken care of, not losing sight of them. Cause that was a big thing that happened with my dad. I remember that he just fell apart once my mom got sick, and when she passed, it just got even worse. And I didn't want that to happen. I refused to let that to happen. So I definitely became more focused than I ever had on anything as far as being there for them and trying to be there for her when she was going through that process. And try not to focus on all the what ifs and what could possibly happen, because it was a lengthy process. She went through all her treatments, the surgeries, the radiation, and that was definitely a real shaken experience that definitely brought me back to reality at a decent low level of my life that dipped a little bit lower before it jumped back up.
I got to ask you something about your dad. And if you don't want to answer it, don't. But I've got to ask you, when you talk about this, and you said that you thought back to that so much while that was going on, was there ever a point when this was going on where you look back on your dad and you go, I kind of understand how he would lose it. I kind of understand how he would go off. Or does that harden you even more to it and go, no, fuck that. That's not what you do. You stand up, you be a man, you do what you're supposed to do. Which way do you go down as you're thinking back to all this?
I want to say, without sounding too cliche, it's both. At the time, I'd found my dad, and I was he was not in a healthy place at the time. He had spiraled so much out of control with drugs and alcohol, and he'd been doing that for since I was 5, and at the time I was 35, so about 30 years is his constant downward spiral for self destruction. I mean, I felt sorry for him, but at the same time, it was one of those things that in the moment when I heard all the diagnosis and she started going through the treatment, she started getting sicker and sicker. I understand where he was at, like what caused him to go down that route. And I felt sorry for him. I wish he had some more resolve to kind of stand up and pull up his bootstraps and say, hey, I got 3 kids to think about. But I mean, that everybody's different. Everybody's definitely handles each situation a little differently. So I definitely wasn't angry with him. I definitely didn't get bitter, but I did, kind of take that line in the sand, going, "Hey, this will not be my future. I will not understand why that happened. I can definitely see and empathize with what he went through, but at the same time, part of being a man and being a dad is to think of the greater good. Like, you chose to have these children in this world, so there's not enough time for self-pity You got three little people's childhood that you have great effect on by the choices you make at this point in time. So, and I wasn't going to ruin their childhood like mine was. So I definitely chose the latter and chose to remain strong.
That was going to be my final question. Do you think it made you stronger? When you look back on it now, hindsight's 2020, did it make you stronger?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
And not just stronger. I don't mean just stronger for your life. I mean stronger in going through everything you went through with your wife, being a father at that time, being a husband at that time. Do you think it made you stronger in all those areas too?
Yeah, it definitely has. I've definitely been through some failed marriages previous to this one. And most of the time, when stuff kind of get difficult in whatever relationship status I was in, I would just kind of do what I did with a foster home, whatever. I'd kind of give up and wipe my hands clean of it and find a way to move on to the next adventure, I guess. But kind of going through that experience definitely hardened me up a little bit and realized that can't just always do things like that, especially when there's kids involved. So.
Man, let's talk about where people can find you, where they can look into you a little more, where they can get some of your boot camp survivor shirts, all that kind of stuff. Where can people find you?
So I got on Instagram, usually I'm making goofy videos, keeping my humor up and messing with folks. Bearded Frogman on Instagram, beardedfrogman.com is tank tops. You guys can check it out, check the website out, check the story behind the tank tops and Tank Top Friday. And also GBRS group, working with those guys as one of the instructors and bringing good quality training to mostly military and law enforcement guys, but to the public as well.
If you don't mind, we can put out your wife's website too, mhanstudio.com.
Yeah, she makes some phenomenal. She's an artist. She likes to believe it or not, but she's very creative and does some amazing stuff with earrings. Unfortunately, I don't wear earrings except for the belly button ring every now and then, but she does some pretty fantastic work.
Well, we'll make sure we get that on the website too. Man, I'm so glad we got to do this. I'm so appreciative that you came back even after I messed it up the first time and you told your story, because it is an awesome story. I wish so many people could hear it. Guys, you know where you can find Joe. Let's talk about where you can find me. As always, you can find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast, and you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations, they're in video form. When you go there, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment, join the group, know what's going on, be the first to see everything that's coming out. Now that we know where we can find me, let's talk about the one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net. That's got audio, video. Joe's got his own page. He's got pictures. He's got links. Everything you need to know about him is there. Everything you need to find contact information or further about his story will all be there on his own episode page. It's dtdpodcast.net, and it's your look into this show, everything about it. Now that we've talked about all that, let's talk about my amazing sponsors. You know one of these guys, Mac Belts and Police Coffee. We all know that nothing stands up to wear and tear like a good leather belt. And if you're looking for the toughest leather belt on earth, then you've come to the right place. Mac Belts, they're handcrafted in the USA by veterans who are serious about their craft. If you're looking for a belt that's tough enough for your active lifestyle and helps support those who've given so much to our country, look no further than Mac Belts. It's the toughest belt on the planet. Everybody knows my friend over there, Mac Alexander. He runs the place and he makes some badass belts. I wear them every day. I have multiple ones for dress, multiple ones for work. They are the best. They're a perfect solution for casual or dress wear, and they're ideal for utility or firearms carry. Mac Belts, the toughest belts on earth. You can find that and so much more at macbelts.com. Now let's talk about coffee. Police Coffee is an officer-owned business, and it's dedicated to crafting the finest coffees and blends, and they're shipped as soon as they're made to provide you with the freshest coffee available. Each batch, it's roasted fresh by people who know what it means to stay vigilant, and their specialty coffees do not waste one drop when flavor is concerned. Their coffee's some of the best you'll find, but it also serves an important cause. They give back to my community. 50% of their profits go towards helping family members of police officers who fell in the line of duty. Everyone knows it's pumpkin spice season, it's eggnog season. They have all those flavors there, but I'll talk about my favorite, the Pecan Coffee One Ranger. It's the best combination in the world. It's rich, sweet, nutty, and buttery, and its flavor cuts right through coffee's natural acidity to give you a smooth and satisfying coffee experience. When you go to their website, policecoffee.com, put in DJK10 for 10% off your order. They have full bean, they have ground, they have K-cups, they have coffee mugs, they have dog treats, they have everything that you could possibly need to enjoy coffee. Make sure you stop by there, policecoffee.com and macbelts.com. Guys, that's going to be it for this week. Joe, thank you again for coming by and telling me your story, letting me record it one more time, and I won't mess it up this time. Guys, that's Joe. I'm DJ. Catch us on the next one. We'll see you later.